We are fascinated by beautiful things, and we love to watch them burn. A strange obsession with delicate frailty. We wish it could last forever, but there's power in the immolation. If we can control the fire, maybe we can rise above it. Or maybe the destruction releases a simple chemical in our minds that makes us feel alive. The first call came in at 2:49 p.m. on Monday, February 9th, 1942. Made from call box number 852 on Pier 88, the call triggered an automatic alarm at the fire department's central office in Manhattan at 79th Street. An alert was sent out to every firehouse in the city. West 43rd Street Engine Company No. 2 was the first to arrive on the scene. Through the bitter cold and ragged winter wind, the fire crew gazed up at the second largest ocean liner in the world, half-painted wartime gray, smoke billowing from every orifice. A second alarm was immediately called in as sirens echoed throughout the city behind them. It was one of the largest fires in the history of New York City, though fortunately nowhere near the deadliest. By the time city firefighters stepped aboard the Great Liner, the battle was already lost. A series of short-sighted decisions and oversights already doomed the magnificent ship. Only 2 months before, the United States was attacked by Imperial Japan. The world was at war, and now, the flames had finally reached Manhattan. The rattled city watched helplessly as one of the great wonders of the world, a floating work of art, a testament to the triumph of peacetime ingenuity, like the world that created her, was lost to the flames.
She had crossed the peaceful ocean in 4 days, 3 hours, and 2 minutes. She was the fastest thing that ever floated on water. While radio networks broadcast her arrival over the nation, everything in the North River that could hoot or toot or whistle went into action.
Despite the looming war, no one imagined when the Normandie pulled away from the pier in Le Havre on August 23, 1939, that the Great Liner would never return to her home in France. Still, the air crackled with unease. Appeasement had failed. Hitler was preparing to attack Poland, the final red line for France and Britain. In an all too familiar lie, Hitler claimed that Poland had attacked Germany. This falsehood was used to characterize his invasion of a sovereign nation as a defensive operation. His language was violent and depraved. He promised to kill without pity or mercy all men, women, and children of Polish descent or language. By this point, aside from his own fanatical followers, no one was fooled, and the continent raced for another war. Normandie carried 1,417 passengers as she sailed west, mostly Americans eager to get out of Europe before the guns began firing. Her officers, led by Commandant Etienne Payan de Galanterie, were painfully aware that their nation could go to war at any moment. Normandie was the second largest ship in the world and a symbol of French national pride. She was a clear target that would make any German U-boat commander a hero back home if he managed to sink her. Only 1 day into the voyage, the German superliner Bremen appeared on the horizon. A former blue ribbon holder herself, the liner was an unwelcome sight. While only a few months before, the two ships would exchange a friendly salute and elicit nothing more than a passing point of interest for their idle passengers, the Bremen was now a potential threat. No one knew how the war would play out on the Atlantic, or how prepared the Germans were to carry out an assault. The fear was that the moment hostilities broke out, Bremen's captain could easily convey Normandie's position to a nearby U-boat that would quickly pounce on the defenseless liner. Normandie's captain wasn't going to take any chances. He ordered the engines full ahead, and soon the powerful Normandie raced forward at over 30 knots. She easily overtook the Bremen, and soon the German liner disappeared on the horizon behind them. clear of German eyes, warlike precautions were implemented. Lights were dimmed all over the ship and overhead bulbs were removed from cabins. Curtains were drawn over the windows in her grand public spaces. Radio silence is ordered, and passengers were banned from sending or receiving messages. The ship's progress, once shared and boasted over, was now hidden, and helmsmen were ordered to sail in zigzags. While staff carried on as usual, maintaining the high level of service and luxury that the ship was famous for, the mood on board was tense. Even without news from the outside world, passengers knew what was coming, and most were aware that the Atlantic was about to become a very dangerous place. But finally, the lights of New York blazed on the horizon, and Normandie pulled into Pier 88 on August 28th. Her passengers disembarked, grateful to be in the safety of North America. Bremen arrived shortly after and spent a few tense days preparing to leave the now hostile city. She finally pulled away on August 30th without any passengers. Normandie's crew lined her deck to watch the German ship leave, and the French tricolor was dipped in salute. It was an emotional moment for both crews. Despite their nationalities, they shared the sea. Their great ships united them far more than the angry men at home, compelling them to hate each other. Normandie should have left on that same day, but her managers in Paris ordered her to remain in New York. Her passengers were rebooked to the Aquitania, and her crew went about their work. On September 1st, German troops carried out Hitler's threats and moved into Poland. Britain and France declared war on September 3rd. With their nation at war, the people who lived and worked on Normandy, a symbol of French national pride, wondered when they would finally return home. But the Normandie would never sail again. Despite a vigorous defense, Poland fell to Nazi Germany in 35 days. While Britain and France braced for a repeat of the brutal stagnation of World War I trench warfare, Nazi Germany was about to unleash something completely unexpected. But in the first few months after war was declared, there was very little fighting between the British and French and the Germans. Known as the Phony War, this period left many wondering if this new conflict would amount to anything near the scale of the Great War. Germany instead attacked Norway and Denmark and focused on the Battle of the Atlantic. At the outset of the war, Germany's Kriegsmarine was hopelessly outmatched by Britain's Royal Navy and France's Marine Nationale. Instead of direct conflict, the Nazis instead focused on trying to starve the United Kingdom through commerce raiding. The U-boat was one of Germany's deadliest weapons. Only hours after war was declared, U-30 sank the 13,000-ton British liner Athenia, killing 117 civilian passengers and crew. The early success of German commerce raiding confirmed that the safest thing for the Normandie was to remain in New York. The United States was officially neutral, and while some in the country were sympathetic to Nazi Germany, the majority supported Britain and France. Manned by a skeleton crew of 114, the Normandie sat idle at Pier 88. She was soon joined by RMS Queen Mary. A few weeks later, the brand new RMS Queen Elizabeth appeared at Pier 90. This was somewhat of a surprise as the unfinished liner, now the largest ship in the world, snuck out of the UK in the cover of night and made a mad dash across the Atlantic in total secret. For 5 months, the three largest liners in the world sat side by side in New York, while their countries fought a losing battle against Nazi Germany. In May 1940, the real war began as Germany unleashed their blitzkrieg strategy on French, British, and Belgian land forces. Totally unprepared for the aggressive new war tactic, the Allied armies splintered, and soon German forces raced across France. By June, the British expeditionary forces were evacuating the continent at Dunkirk, and massive swaths of the French army were being captured.
This 10th day of June, 1940, the hand that held the dagger has struck it into the back of its neighbor.
By June 14th, Paris fell to the Nazis. On June 22, 1940, French Prime Minister Philippe Pétain signed the Second Armistice of Campania, surrendering to Nazi Germany. The North would fall under occupation, while the South would be controlled by Vichy France, a vestige of the former French Republic totally controlled by the Nazis. Hitler expected to lose 1 million soldiers taking France. Instead, he lost only 43,110. The speed and efficacy of the operation filled him with joy, pride, and an unearned confidence that would lead to increasingly reckless decision-making throughout the rest of the war. While her country fell, Normandy remained in a state of limbo. On June 22nd, the same day that France surrendered, the new Vichy government ordered all French flag ships returned to France. But this would amount to handing the Normandie over to the Nazis. Instead, the liner was placed in protective custody by the US State Department, and 150 Coast Guard agents were stationed on board to protect her from sabotage. While no one knew exactly what to do with her, she was obviously a valuable target. For almost a year and a half, while her contemporaries Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth set out to transport troops all over the world, the Normandie remained in New York. But everything changed on December 7, 1941, when Imperial Japan launched a surprise attack on the United States Naval Base in Pearl Harbor. Shortly after the United States declared war on Japan, Germany declared war on the United States. With this declaration, the Normandie was now the asset of a belligerent foreign power. On December 12th, the liner was seized by the United States under the right of Angary. Her remaining French crew members were relieved, and maintenance of the ship was turned over to the United States Navy. She was renamed USS Lafayette in honor of the Marquis de Lafayette, the French military officer that joined the Continental Army during the American Revolution, helping secure the nation's independence. Throughout her time in New York, the Normandie's intricate fire control system was carefully maintained by her French crew. The ship was subdivided into 4 fire control zones, all of which were monitored from her central fire station, a control room located on A deck, just aft of her 3rd funnel. There were 84 fire equipment lockers located throughout the ship, all connected to illuminated panels in the central fire station. This allowed the on-duty petty officer to monitor the ship and determine where a fire was located. The control room also included 21 glass tubes through which air from all over the ship was pumped and monitored for smoke. Every one of her 1,075 cabins were equipped with thermostatic monitors, all of which were connected to the central fire station. They would illuminate a red light if a temperature change was detected. There was also an intricate system of large mechanical fire doors located throughout the ship that could be closed remotely to contain a fire. These were present even in her large sweeping first-class public rooms, often cleverly hidden. All of this amounted to one of the most complex and comprehensive fire control systems on any ship afloat at the time. But most critically, the Normandie's fire control plan didn't just rely on technology. Every single one of her 1,345 crew members was trained not only to keep an eye out for signs of fire, but also what action to take when one starts. Every single one of these protections was stripped away when the United States Navy took over the Normandie. With their French crew relieved, there was no one available who understood the vast and complicated inner workings of the massive ship. But the country was at war. Resources and manpower were being shifted everywhere. A combination of necessity and arrogance left the great ship vulnerable as the Navy mulled over what to do with her. They didn't care about her beauty, they cared about her power. For a brief moment, the idea of transforming her into an aircraft carrier was entertained. but this would have been too costly and time-consuming. Instead, they went with the most obvious choice, a troop carrier. After all, carrying people was what she was designed to do. So in the coming weeks, a small army of workers descended on the sleeping ship. They went to work removing the great works of art that adorned nearly every corner, carefully removing paneling, giltwork, light fixtures, furniture, statues, paintings, everything that made Normandie the most luxurious ship afloat. Ordinarily, the work would not be completed right there in Manhattan, but shipyard space was in hot demand, so the work had to happen where it could. By February 1942, her conversions were well underway, and she was transformed into an austere, hulking giant. But the work was far from complete, and Pier 88 buzzed with activity as the largest ship in the United States Navy was prepared for war. Normandie's conversion into the Lafayette was a chaotic affair. Initially, the work was ordered to be completed by February 1st, 1942. That gave workers just over a month to strip away the 83,000-ton ship's luxurious fittings and install everything from dormitories and showers to reinforced deck guns and magazines. Even in the best of circumstances, it was an unrealistic timeline. But the conversions were marked with indecision and carelessness. On July 15th, it was decided that the ship would be operated by the War Department, a change that would impact her modifications. So the deadline was pushed. She would now be ready to leave for dry docking in Boston on February 14th and fully ready to set sail on February 28th. Even with the extension, it was an absurdly ambitious timeline. But after all, there was a war on. At the start of 1942, the United States and her allies faced an enormous challenge. Hitler had conquered most of the European continent. Imperial Japan was sweeping through the Pacific. America faced a logistical nightmare. Ships like the Normandie would be a critical asset, so the work moved forward at a breakneck pace. By February, nearly all of her luxurious fittings had been carefully removed. Only a few fixtures remained, and workers had turned their efforts to bringing aboard the utilitarian equipment that would accommodate thousands of soldiers. Her fine rugs were replaced with plain linoleum. Showers were installed in her writing room. Crates of materials were haphazardly piled in her vast dining room and lounge, now converted into a troop mess and recreation hall. These included 1,413 cartons of Kapok-filled life preservers just delivered from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Packed in burlap, Kapok was standard issue for the United States Navy at the time. Made from tree fiber, the material, packed into a canvas vest, was an excellent flotation device. It also happened to be extremely flammable. The next week, a small crew would be tasked with unloading the vests, stenciling the word Lafayette on them, and distributing them in cabins throughout the ship. But for now, they lay in half-open heaps all over the former first-class lounge. It was Monday, May 9th, 1942. The last remnants of the lounge's former glamour were scheduled for removal. The room was flanked by 4 circular sofas with massive light fixtures rising out of the middle. They were some of the hundreds of stunning, unique lighting fixtures found all over the ship, all works of art in themselves. By February 1942, the sofas were gone, along with the glass Lalique sleeves. All that remained was the steel tripod that supported the glass sculpture. How these were fixed to the deck is lost to time, but they would be removed using an oxyacetylene torch. A small group of men would secure a chain to the top of the structure, while a cutter hacked away at the base. A worker named Clement Derrick was tasked with wielding the torch. When one leg was cut, the crew would pull the tower down, then Clement would sever the final 2 legs. Throughout the process, a man was tasked with holding a metal shield over the torch to contain the shower of sparks. The starboard pair was easily cut down over the course of the morning. Then the crew broke for lunch. When they returned, they cut down the port forward stanchion without a problem. Then they moved to the aft port stanchion. This one would be the most difficult. Not because of the structure itself, but because the base of the tower was covered by a pile of cartons filled with Kapok life preservers. The men were tired. The work was hot and backbreaking, but they were almost done with the project. They went to work clearing away the life preservers, casting them carelessly aside, making just enough space to secure the chain and give Clement access to the tripod's legs. He had to contort his body around the cartons just to begin cutting. But just as he began, Foreman Alphonsus Gately called out to the crew to stop. This was not how the work should be done. He ordered more of the cartons cleared away from the base of the stanchion. The men feigned compliance by only rearranging a few cartons before resuming. The first leg was cut and the tower was pulled down. Now they just needed to cut away the final two legs and the steel structure could be hauled away. Clement began cutting, and just as he was finishing, the man holding the metal shield moved away a moment too early. A cascade of white-hot metal fragments flew out, cascading down on the nearby cartons. At 2:37 p.m., one of these sparks landed on some burlap hanging out of one of the cartons. It immediately burst into flames. The immediate response to the fire was like something out of an old cartoon. The crew sprang into action, but without any coordination or strategy, their efforts were almost comically ineffective. Some grabbed whatever they could and tried to beat out the flames. Others grabbed burning bales and threw them across the room, inadvertently setting fire to their own clothes and further spreading the fire. The room quickly descended into chaos as burning men ran in every direction. Someone went to fetch 2 buckets of water that sat way too far away from where the work was being carried out. As he sprinted toward the fire, he tripped over a roll of linoleum, spilling the water nowhere near the blaze. Another man grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher, but when he aimed it at the growing inferno and pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The foreman on duty, Alphonsus Gately, raced to connect a fire hose to a hydrant on the promenade deck, but the US Navy issue hose was incompatible with the French hydrant. And so the small fire, which with proper precautions would have been easy to snuff out, quickly spiraled out of control. When the fire broke out, Gately sent a runner to the central fire station, but only a few days before, the fire control room had been moved. The messenger likely didn't know the new location, because the alert never arrived. There were 50 firemen assigned to the Lafayette, but these were senior positions given to older men with no significant fire training. With welding and cutting happening all over the ship, 50 was not nearly enough, even if they were properly trained. Word of the fire didn't reach officers on the bridge until someone in the theater's projection booth finally phoned asking for help. The bridge had a dedicated telegraph line connecting them with the New York Fire Department. The officer on duty immediately pressed the alert button. But he didn't know. The line was disconnected in January. Within minutes, the entire lounge and connecting rooms were engulfed in flames. Billowing black smoke was pulled into the elevator shafts and sucked deep down into the engine rooms. Only moments after the fire broke out, the choking smoke and fumes forced the engineers on duty to evacuate. Soon, steam pressure dropped to almost nothing, and the ship lost critical power. Lights failed, plunging the ship into darkness, and water pumps lost pressure just as crews were establishing hoses to fight the fire. They only got a few seconds of water before the stream cut out. The first call to the fire department didn't come from the Lafayette's bridge. Instead, it was made from call box number 852 on Pier 88, triggering an alarm at every firehouse in Manhattan. As crews began arriving on the scene, a second alarm was quickly called in. When he received the new alarm, a dispatcher at the Central Park station remarked to his colleague that he hoped it wasn't the Normandie. Fire crews from all over the city arrived at the piers to see the massive ship almost completely engulfed in thick, billowing smoke. The weather that day only made things worse. Not only was it brutally cold, intense winds fed a steady stream of oxygen as the inferno ripped through the liner. While the situation seemed dire, with the right response, the fire could be contained and the former Normandie could be saved. Unfortunately, the response was anything but ideal. When the fire broke out, there were approximately 3,000 people aboard the Lafayette, a combination of civilian workers and Coast Guard and Navy personnel. Within minutes, power failed, plunging the ship into darkness. Most of the men on board were unfamiliar with the vast labyrinth of corridors and passageways that ran throughout the great ship. With thick black smoke billowing throughout, navigating the depths of the ship was almost impossible. By 4:08 p.m., a fifth alarm was called in. Fire crews and equipment from all over the city descended on Pier 88. Soon the fireboats James Duane, John J. Harvey, Firefighter, and the Hewitt pulled alongside the Lafayette and aimed their hoses at the blaze. Unfortunately, the inferno raged deep inside the ship, and their water never made it past the promenade deck. Instead of fighting the fire, gallons of water began filling her upper decks. Drainage scuppers all over the ship were clogged with ice, trapping water high in the ship. With all the excess weight, she soon took on a noticeable port list. All the while, chilling winds fanned the flames, fueled by heaps of flammable construction material. Everything from carpeting, cans of paint, cork insulation, and wooden crates accelerated the blaze. While Navy and Coast Guard men worked to fight the fire, others evacuated the burning ship in any way that they could. Some crowded the gangways, fighting past firefighters who were trying to board the ship. Others deployed lifeboats or scaled scaffolding used by the painters. At one point, the fire department extended a ladder to her bow in order to help men who had been trapped there by the flames. Approximately 200 were injured in the chaos. One firefighter employed by the general contractor working on the ship, Frank Trentacosta, was killed when a pressure tank exploded in the heat. Fire Commissioner Patrick Walsh arrived on the scene only moments after the first calls came in. He was soon joined by Admiral Andrews and Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. It was never clear whether the fire department or the Navy was in charge of handling the emergency. Another New Yorker soon joined the scene, Vladimir Yorkovich, Normandie's chief naval architect, the one person who knew the ship better than anyone. He immediately recognized that the growing list was a bigger threat than the fire. His solution was to open the ship's seacocks and allow her to settle into the mud on an even keel, minimizing any structural damage. But no matter how hard he tried to get aboard the ship or offer his guidance, he was blocked. He was told over and over again that this was a Navy job. Eventually, firefighters got the upper hand, and the last flames were extinguished by 8:30. At this point, the Lafayette was salvageable. Nearly all of her art had been removed, and most of her machinery had emerged unscathed. The fire damage was extensive, but not irreparable. Shortly after the fire was put out, Mayor LaGuardia and Admiral Andrews spoke with reporters. They told them that the situation was under control, and the ship had what Andrews called a safe 16-degree list. It was anything but safe. As crews fought the fire from every direction, gallons and gallons had been pumped into her superstructure, leaving the liner dangerously unstable. It was clear that water was not draining, and some even suggested cutting holes to allow it to escape. But in the chaos, this never ended up happening. So the port list was never addressed. When the fire was finally put out, her port bilge keel was already resting precariously on the bottom, partially stabilizing her, but at an extremely awkward angle. This was during low tide. As tidal waters began flowing in, the ship was lifted from her temporary perch and the list intensified as water poured in through numerous openings. By 11:30 p.m., she reached an alarming 40-degree list. It was clear that the ship was about to capsize. Loudspeakers rang out, urging everyone still aboard to evacuate the ship immediately. The press was asked to leave the area. The Navy didn't want the world to watch their failure. Over the next few hours, the ship slowly rolled over. Her gangways ripped away from Pier 88 one by one. Deep inside, a thunderous cacophony of everything imaginable breaking loose and falling through the ship rang out. An ominous death rattle echoed through the night. Finally, at 2:45 in the morning on February 10th, the ship came to rest on her port side. It was a slow and undignified end for one of the greatest ships ever built. Lying on her side, half submerged, the Normandie was all but destroyed. Now, officials were confronted with the daunting task of clearing the massive wreck from one of the busiest waterways in the world. There was still a shred of hope that the wreck could be saved, but first, she needed to be raised and removed from Pier 88. The fire was an embarrassing failure for the United States Navy, and an investigation was immediately launched. While sabotage and mafia connections were suggested, it became clear that the real cause of the fire and ensuing chaos was carelessness, rule violations, lack of coordination between the various parties on board, lack of a clear command structure during the fire, and a hasty, poorly planned conversion effort. The incredibly complex salvage operation involved completely removing her superstructure, sealing her damaged hull, and carefully refloating the massive ship. The efforts took 18 months and cost an estimated $11 million. Finally, on August 4, 1943, crews began pumping water out of the ship, and after 2 days, she was finally righted. The newly refloated Lafayette was then towed to the Brooklyn Navy Yard to be assessed. By this point, the United States had been at war for 2 years, and the tide had changed considerably in its favor. Logistical needs had been addressed. An additional large and powerful troop transport was just no longer needed. Repairing and restoring the Lafayette would be exceedingly costly. A half-hearted survey of the refloated hull was initiated, but never fully completed, and by the end of 1944, the Navy renounced any need for the vessel. She sat out the remainder of the war, crippled and all but forgotten. Following the end of the war, there was no one willing or able to expend the resources required to restore the Normandie. The world that built her was dead. Finally, she was sold for scrap on October 3rd, 1946, for $161,680. She was towed one last time to Port Newark, New Jersey, and broken apart. By December 31st, 1948, the Normandie was gone. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until next one, be nice to people.